Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for offering me a chance to speak here. I'm going to pull up my screen. All right. Good morning. Today, I'm here to tell you about ocularistry, a little bit about the past, the present, and a little bit about the future. I work out of Tarzana, California, and I do have a financial interest in artificial eyes. So I wanted to start by showing you guys and the results we're getting these days are quite remarkable, and we're very proud of what we're doing. This is a man with a live eye, and you can see the motion and the detail that we're able to achieve. And I don't think most people would know that he's wearing an artificial eye. And I don't think many people know that they can move and look as beautiful as they do on that patient. So my background, I'm a USC graduate, studied economics. I'm a board certified ocularist, meaning I've passed board certification tests to demonstrate competency in ocularistry. And I also have a 5-year degree from the American Society of Ocularists going through their education program. I have 2 kids and a wife, and my kids have definitely made me a better ocularist. Treating children, I have 2 dogs, and I'm a 3rd generation eye maker. So I've been around this and learned quite a bit about our field. I first started working as an ocularist in Tarzana, California back in about 2002. After graduating USC, I wanted a skill that I could do with my hands. And my family had this business, so I came in and volunteered and started to love what I was doing. After the passing of my grandfather, I continued in Beverly Hills with my mother to perfect the digital iris that my family had created. And we updated the technology with a more consistent, reproducible printing system, from which I've gotten 2 patents, one on my digital iris and one on a dilating pupil that I'll show you at the end of the video. I enjoy mountain biking to work as much as possible. And I think one of the important lessons I've learned in ocularistry solves so many problems in life is to just treat people the way you would want to be treated. And that solves so many issues and helps you give excellent care to many people. So causes of eye loss aren't just cancer, like some people may expect. We deal with about 4 different categories of eye loss, and they're roughly equally distributed throughout trauma, birth defects, diabetes, and cancer. Trauma is, we are really the end of the road in eyeballs. So we see a lot of extreme things from trauma, maybe like a car accident or an assault, from little kids poking each other with sticks or getting a little piece of glass in your eye when you're changing a light bulb. We see a fair amount of people who lose their eyes from simple things like opening a champagne bottle and having a cork pop them in the eye. So there's many reasons for traumatic eye loss. Essentially, somebody has an accident and they go in for a surgery to repair it, and sometimes those surgeries don't work. They go in for multiple surgeries, develop scar tissue, and after a while, perhaps a painful eye develops or an unsightly eye, and that's where people begin to need an ocularist. Birth defects. We see quite a few birth defects, things like congenital cataracts or microphthalmia, which is a small underdeveloped eye. And then there's extreme cases such as anophthalmia, where children are born without eyes. And there's other rare birth defects that end up needing our services. Another large cause for eye loss is diabetes. And their healing process of their body just doesn't quite go as well as it does in a normal body. And sometimes when people go in for just a simple surgery, they end up with a failed result, and after several failed surgeries, needing a prosthetic eye. And then finally, cancer. We deal with a lot of melanoma, and another common cancer that we deal with is retinoblastoma, which is a very common childhood cancer, and that causes a fair amount of eye loss. So about the past of artificial eyes, prosthetic eyes go back thousands of years. Eyes to the Egyptians were something that needed to be kind of restored after death. They would provide prosthetic eyes or artificial eyes to help aid the king towards the afterlife. They have found prosthetic eyes in mummies going back thousands of years. And the oldest known example of an artificial eye I'm aware of goes back to roughly 28 to 3,000 years ago, where in Iran, Afghanistan area, they actually found a prosthetic eye embedded in the skull of somebody, and when they removed it, they were able to find details such as inlaid gold thread in the prosthetic. So modern prosthetic eyes really didn't come about until modern surgery, around 1800, when anesthesia allowed for removal of the eye. But they did have prosthetic eyes for thousands of years before that. This is a forensic photo of what they thought the patient may have looked like back thousands of years ago wearing their prosthesis. Many cultures have an importance of the eyes, and one thing that some people have done is cover the eyes of the dead and even the third eye of insight of the deceased, and in idea that they might pay the ferryman to get them over the river Styx into the afterlife. Here is an old glass eye maker's kit. These are glass eyeballs here, and on the right you can see some of the glass tubes are used to color and shape and provide the base color for the artificial eye. And in the middle here, you can see these are the kind of bulb glass pieces that they developed that are the foundation of making an artificial eye. Through the straw, they can blow some air to vary the shape, and then they use different tools to shape and empirically fit the prosthetic eye. They're not able to precisely fit these. They can kind of estimate the shape by, you know, a glass eye maker can. It's different than an impression fit prosthetic eye where we can actually cast things on the acrylic eye, and I'll get to that, a little bit more of that here in a minute. But I wanted to show you guys a video of how glass eyes are made because it's a pretty fascinating process. Glass eyes today are pretty much only made over in Germany and Italy. That's where they really perfected glass eye making and a lot of the, you know, glass arts. And what you see here is the beginning tube of glass where they separate and create the first little bulb. So he's heating up this glass, constantly rotating things and beginning to make the beginning bulb of the artificial eye. So he's going to separate that, set the tube aside, and then begin to blow and create the shape. So at this point, he's separated things, and then he's going to begin to color the prosthetic eye. So first, he's going to get the shape approximated, and he begins to blow through the tube to get the right volume of the artificial eye. And you can see him, he's kind of varying the temperature of the flame, and this is the beginning of the iris, the colored part of the eye, where he dabs a bit of the glass on here and begins to create the proper color. So you'll see this technique, you know, he's heating things up and cooling them. Temperature is critical here, and there's only so much time you have to work with these glass eyes. So he's manipulating this iris here, and he's going to begin to put some of the detail on. And essentially, you know, they're dabbing some glass on here, and that's about the resolution that you can expect. You can see the thickness of his rod of the glass he's applying here. So they can create some beautiful colors, but the detail isn't there like what we can do with acrylic eyes because we have more time, and with our digital process, we can use tools like Adobe Photoshop to get every little pixel right, where this ocularist is limited by the thickness of the glass stripes that he can create. So he's gently applying some glass onto the color and changing the color of the eye. So you'll see him heating this up, and then he can kind of blow into this and match the diameter of the patient. And it's just a kind of fascinating process that these guys can do. And from beginning to end, you walk in the door of a German eye maker, you walk out about 3 hours later with your custom prosthetic eye. So it's a very efficient process. These are done for a few $100s because they are so efficient, but there are some downsides to glass. The biggest one is glass is, it degrades with time. The chemistry of the eye socket breaks down the glass and causes it to become scratchy after about a year. So these pieces need to be remade frequently. Secondarily, glass eyes are empirically fit, and they can't be impression fit. So they're generally trying to shape the eye to the eye socket, but they can't be as precise as what we can do with plastic materials. Also, glass can break. It's not unusual for a glass eye to break in a patient, and that is just a terrible thing. Or they go to take their piece out at night because it's not so comfortable, and they drop it off the counter or something like that, and their eye ends up shattering, and then they are out of luck. So there are some major disadvantages to glass, but the main advantage is the speed at which they can create it. So acrylic eyes are the substitute for the glass eye, and they were invented roughly around World War II, at which time private industry and the U.S. Army were creating the substitute for the acrylic eye about the same time. So there's many people who take claim to inventing the acrylic eye. My family is one of them. My grandfather was one of the pioneers of ocularistry as well as anaplastology, and here you can see him making prosthetic noses. He made prosthetic hands, as well as one of the founders of the American Society of Ocularists. So our acrylic eye is different. I've touched on it, but we can take an impression, and I'm going to show you an impression of an eyeball here shortly, and then we can follow that impression to more detail or more closely match the patient's eye socket. There's also prosthetic eyes that have been made of other materials. They've tried many things over the years. You know, the ancient Egyptians had, you know, metal eyes, glass or golden eyes. Around the 1800s, glass eyes came about, and more recently, here maybe about 2010, a silicone eye was developed. Somebody thought a squishy silicone eye might be better than a hard acrylic eye and more comfortable for the patient. However, the tear film ended up being repelled by the silicone. They were very dry. There's also a suction effect of the prosthetic onto the eyeball, made them tremendously uncomfortable. So today, pretty much artificial eyes are made out of acrylic most places around the world, and there's still a few glass eye makers left in Germany and Italy. And we've already touched on why acrylic eyes are better than glass eyes. And you know, they are unbreakable. That's one major advantage. Here's my grandfather back in down at Wilshire at the VA down in 1954 with his team of eye makers and ophthalmologists. So in terms of making the most beautiful eyes, the real limiting factor is the foundation from which we have to build upon. And again, we deal with a wide variety of deformity, from slightly Tysical globe all the way to the most severe cancers, where you know, parts of the eyelids and the entire orbit are removed. But the ideal patient to fit is a slightly Tysical globe. And what is a Tysical globe? That a damaged eye is much like a grape that's becoming a raisin, and it loses some of its fluid, shrinks a little bit. Sometimes some wrinkles develop, and often the eye will gray over, causing an unsightly appearance that the person wants to hide and match to their good eye. So this patient is the ideal candidate for an artificial eye because there's just enough space for us to fit our prosthesis, but it still has the natural eye underneath to drive beautiful motion. And this is an example of what the patient might get. Over here at the edge, you can see the thin prosthetic eye allows for beautiful motion and comfort. More traumatic foundations would be an evisceration or an enucleation. I prefer the least invasive foundation for eye as possible. On the left, you can see an evisceration. An evisceration might be performed on somebody who has a damaged or disfigured eye, and it's least invasive because they are essentially just removing the contents inside the eyeball. And you know, I've got my little eyeball model here. An evisceration, really removing the cornea and the inside of the eye, and then they replace it with an implant. They maintain all the muscles around the eye, so things are still able to move very well, and you still haven't disrupted the foundation of the eye. An enucleation is a more invasive procedure where they're actually removing the entire white of the eyeball and then replacing it with an implant around which they wrap the muscles, and that still can provide some very good motion of an artificial eye. When the eye is removed, they need to replace the volume of the eye in some way. And we've tried many, many things over the years. The acrylic sphere or a silicone sphere is where many people are going back to today. But they've tried many things, such as rings, where they attach the muscles of the eye, and that would help drive motion. Problem is, these rings would tend to become exposed and come out of the eye socket and cause tremendous discharge and all sorts of troubles. So surgery has really progressed probably since the 1980s, and we no longer have a lot of the complications of these implants. The problems that we've had in the past are migration of the implant. So for example, if the eye was enucleated and the silicone ball was placed in, it might squeak out between the muscles and end up in the edge of the orbit, causing very little space to be able to fit a prosthetic eye. Now, with modern surgical technique, this is very rare. Also, they have inophthalmos, where the eye is recessed too far back. There was a material called hydroxyapatite, which is a coral material, very scratchy, and that would end up often coming through the tissue of the eye and having a rough surface on the back, causing discomfort and mucus discharge. And there's a problem called extrusion. With some of these integrated implants, it may begin to actually come out through the tissue of the eye socket. And for these reasons, a lot of these integrated implants, meaning implants where a prosthetic eye might attach, we've gone away from these things. There's also an integrated implant called hydroxyapatite, which is, again, this coral implant. And they were able to drill and input a stem into the implant and drive some wonderful motion. I'll show you an example of this. This was developed around the 1980s by Dr. Art Perry down in San Diego, and can drive beautiful motion. There are a lot of complications because when they drill that hole down into the implant, sometimes bacteria can get down into that moist, warm environment and cause an infection where they need to remove the entire implant again. And since hydroxyapatite implant, blood vessels grow into it, when they have to remove it, it can be a very invasive surgery. In the best examples, again, you can get sort of result. It's beautiful, but sometimes the complications, I believe, outweigh the benefits of the hydroxyapatite, and I prefer more of a silicone or an acrylic implant. Often, however, I just leave that decision up to the surgeon and the patient. However, I do have fairly strong feelings on the subject. So, not all prosthetic eyes are created the same. Many people cut as many corners as possible and are just trying to make as many eyes as possible. And essentially, what some people end up doing is they just take generic shapes, they pull them out of a drawer, put them into the patient, and they go ahead with them. And these non-impression fit shapes cause irritation to the eye socket, extra discharge and problems. And the best thing to do is an impression fit piece. Curing of the prosthetic eye is extremely important. We mix a solvent into the plastic, and unless you cure it properly, some of that solvent may remain and continue to irritate the patient's eye socket. Some people use toxic materials on the eyes, and they cause all sorts of trouble. It is important to cure and polish your eye properly, and we follow American Dental Association standards to remove as much of that chemical as possible. Another thing that you might see on poor quality eyes is like chipping or scratching. It's not uncommon to see eyes with just horrible surface problems on them, or poor polishing, where somebody leaves scratches all the way around the edge and they just chronically irritate the patient. Finally, another way people save time making artificial eyes is they just use. I've heard of ocularists who just take a rubber stamp and just stamp on the iris for a patient, where everyone's the same size and same color. And not all eyes are created the same. Okay, if you really want a good result, you need to go to somebody who cares and tries to treat you the way you would want to be treated if the situation was reversed. On the flip side, quality eyes are impression fit, meaning taking a mold of the eye. And I'll show you a video of that here shortly. They're cured properly to American Dental Association standards. They're polished well. Typically, we use a 5-power magnification in our industry. In my office, I use a 50-power microscope to really get in and see all the little details, and it helps get things right and make the eye comfortable. When you get all these things right, you can develop a prosthetic eye that gives your patients back the confidence that they once had and allows them to get back to life. So how are they made? We use the modified impression technique, which is endorsed by the American Society of Ocularists. It's the best way to fit an artificial eye. We start by creating an empirical shape that matches the front curvature of the patient's good eye, and then we take an impression with either alginate or polyvinyl siloxane to fill in the back shape of the eye. And we modify the impression as needed to develop function, comfort, and symmetry. Our first impression tray might look something like this, just a clear shell so we can see through and make sure that it's not causing problems on the patient's eye. And we've got some nice symmetry here. And now we're able to begin to fill out the back shape. So sometimes we'll put a little straw on the front to attach our impression gun, and we take a mold of the inside of the socket. On the left is alginate, on the right is polyvinyl siloxane, both are dental materials. Polyvinyl is a newer material and it causes minimal irritation. And you can come back to the impression days, weeks, years later, take a look at it, versus alginate that begins to dry immediately. And roughly by the time you're done molding the piece, the alginate has shrunk and is no longer valid as a representation of the inside of the eye socket. Taking the impression can be the hardest part of the job, especially on children. I'm going to show you how it's done here. And this is a child. If a kid can do it, an adult can do it. And we're actually fitting over a visioned eye on this patient. So we insert the shell, and it takes about 2 minutes for the material to set. So we just try to calm down the patient, relax. And now we're done. We go ahead and remove the impression. And this is the hardest part. It's a little bit sticky on the lashes. You get to see what a tight eye looks like here. All right. First thing we have to do. Once we get our impression, then we begin to mix some plaster, and we embed impression into the plaster, and that gives us the opposite side, or the opposite of the impression within the mold. And we use that, we put plastic into that mold, and then create a custom prosthetic for the patient. At which point we take a photograph, a digital photo of the patient, and using Photoshop, we can measure the diameter of the iris in pixels right here. And we compare that to the diameter of this shape, and we're able to calculate out, because every iris is unique diameter for this patient, 11.92 millimeters. And then we scribe that diameter onto the shell and put a stem on there that points in the proper direction. In this case, I added a little bit of wax to the front surface to thicken up the piece to open up their lids a little bit more. Then we go ahead, this is another example of a fitting with no wax. And from this, we make a mold, and there's a little stem hole from which we will put this iris color that I will show you about here in a minute. So impression and the fitting is all to create this mold from which we will create a new shape for the patient. We've got the digital color inside, and now we're mixing plastic and inserting it into the mold here. Our plastic is a mixture of these very fine spheres, and we mix it with a monomer solvent. This is the chemical that we want to cook out of the eye, and that's very important. We mix it up into a doughy material, and then we insert this doughy material into the mold. We compress the mold at 1,000 psi, and then we cook it under pressure so that bubbles don't develop within the plastic. Once it's cooked, out comes a shape that represents the shape of the patient. And it's covered in some white plastic by hand. Then we go and we shave the white plastic down to make some space for our artwork. And by hand, we create the blend of the limbus, where the color transitions into the white of the eye. And this is really the hallmark of a fine prosthesis. Natural eye has a nice soft blend into the whites of the eye. You don't want it to be too crisp and look unnatural. We polish the shape up, put it on the mold to begin painting. By hand, then we will go and paint the whites of the eye and any details in the iris as necessary. I prefer to take silk thread and lay them on one at a time, match the vascular patterns of the patient. There are easier ways to do it, like just taking a red pencil and drawing them on, but the veins that are done in silk look much more natural. And we paint the whites to create a natural human tissue effect, the whites of the artificial eye. Once we're done painting it, then we put it back onto the mold, mix some clear plastic, and encapsulate all the artwork. And this is what a prosthetic eye comes out like from the mold. My painting system, to keep things consistent, I keep my paints the same throughout the year, and that way I can delegate my painting off to a lab assistant and say, you know what, we need one more coat of yellow, or let's mix a half a coat of yellow. And we've got all of our colors laid out, so the density of the color stays consistent throughout the year, and we know how to apply it properly to create the illusions that we're looking for. And out of that process comes a beautiful artificial eye. So the next thing is the digital iris. And this is what I've created. I've redone the digital iris to change really the back curvature. And the digital iris is really a button that we insert into the artificial eye to replicate the human iris. So this is an example of a digital iris edit. And you can see that we can put in much finer color than anybody could ever paint on by hand. Or like a glass eye maker dabbing that on with the thick piece of glass, we can actually go 1 pixel at a time and get in the tiniest wisps. We can put in illusions of dilating pupil. We can match the limbal blend on the outside. We can mimic the collarette color. We can put in much finer detail. We can match the pupil size to the pixel. And this is an advantage of acrylic eyes in that we can sit down and take our time to get everything right. This is a glass eye maker where they're limited by the temperature of the eye and how long they can take to create things. For my digital iris, this is the image that might be saved in the computer for a person. So this is a B for blue, 4297. So that's the 4,297th color we've created here. The -1 represents what's saved in the computer. Then we darken everything or lighten everything within Photoshop to create a variation that we hold up next to the patient to see what matches. And so in this example, you can see how as we lighten with an L1, L2, L3, L4, you can see the colors lighten. The main base color, the limbus and the stroma, they all lighten. And then as we darken, everything darkens. And then we can go mix and match any part of that. So we could choose, for example, the outer ring of this one. If it was dark, we could choose the inner color of this one, and then the orange color of this one, and mix and match anything, create the most natural colors available. Using this process, I have beaten the Pentagon's state-of-the-art iris scanner to make it through their top-level security of iris recognition. And on top of this, I can combine this ability to manipulate color with every color I've ever made before. And that's where our system gets very strong, because we can mix and match every part of every color we've ever made to match the most difficult colors for patients. This is a side view of our iris button. We can also thin the iris button by shaving down some of the plastic. And using Photoshop, we can create a range of colors that mimic the human iris virtually identically. So how does this work? with numbers between 0 and 255, we can control 16.7 million colors in Photoshop and put these numbers back and say, you know, I want exactly that color right there. And then using that, we can create an array that matches everybody. So color is matched in hue. 0 hue is red. And then as you go up to 255, it goes around this color wheel. And once you hit 255, you come back to 0. So that's the hue. That's kind of the main color, you know, red, green, blue, magenta that we deal with. Saturation is like the neonness of an eye. 0 saturation is gray. 255 is fully neon, like a neon sign. And then the value, or also the brightness, starts at 0, which is black, and as it increases to 255, it becomes fully bright. That's how we can control color precisely. So how is a digital iris like a hand-painted iris? Here is a hand-painted iris on the right and the left, and a digital in the middle, and you really can't tell the difference. We have made these to seamlessly integrate into other ocularist practices so we can help them help other people. On the back, however, we have a numbering system that allows us to know exactly what color we're dealing with and to get the right one in for a patient. Furthermore, to reference back into our color library so we can mix and match different components of other eye colors that we've made in the past. We've also changed the radius of curvature to more naturally match the human iris. On the left was a steep curvature that fit in many eyes, but wasn't really the curvature of the natural iris. We've reinvented that to more naturally represent the human iris. And you can see the back curvature here on these ball bearings. With this technology, I've created a palettes of over 800 colors that we sell other eye makers all around the world, and using my irises, over 30,000 prosthetic eyes have been made in other eye makers' offices using digital technology. You can still overpaint these irises just like any other artificial eye. They're just there to be used as a base to closely match many other people. So ocularists don't need to spend all the time developing that base, and they can use what we have available to minimal painting and focus their efforts more on fit and fabrication and getting lid symmetry, matching the veins and the artwork. They don't have to worry about matching iris as much, and that saves years of training in training an ocularist. So the next things I can show, I've got a few videos that I think I'm going to skip through here. We can come back if there's extra time, but I've got some videos on how we adjust an eye. Once we cook it, we can always come back and adjust things. This is me shaving it down to ready to maybe overlay a pupil. This is how we shave down a color of an eye. We just take a blade, hold it to the digital iris, and then we're able to put the proper diameter on there. We can insert or recess them deeper into an eye using a little bit of a washer. We still do some hand painting, like an arcus senilis. This is kind of a cloudy layer that goes over an eye, and it is truly anterior to the iris color. So we paint that on in many circumstances. We can still go back in and overpaint a pupil if it's too big. And one of the fine touches is painting the blend of the limbus onto the eye so it doesn't look too sharp. So here's an example of how we might paint and change a color of the limbus, which is the transition from the iris color into the whites of the eye. We can also put a different pupil size on if necessary by just dropping a black circle on where it belongs. And typically a pupil is up and in, which is where we try to put this. We're not centered like many people think on most patients. Also, many people aren't aware that we are able to use prosthetics to put vision into people. On the top left, you can see what the prosthetic eye looks like. When it's over a live eye, the pupil appears black. However, we are able to see through it. We drill out a hole of the proper size, and then we can put clear plastic in the middle, and by varying the front curvature, we can create a lens effect to actually magnify the vision that's going into the patient. And this way, we can make an artificial eye. This is the boy who we took the impression of earlier, and this is an artificial eye that he actually sees out of. And we believe that by stimulating the eye and using the optic nerve and allowing the brain to function, we keep the ability for the patient to potentially see in the future if there is some surgery that allows the fixing of the problem that is causing the blindness in the patient. So this is an example of a patient who's wearing a prosthetic eye that he can see out of. Without the thickness of the prosthetic eye, the lids would be closed and no light would be entering the patient. I've got a little testimonial that we could share, and you can just see the boy here speaking real quick. And then finally, we are able to create a dilating pupil effect with our digital precision. We can create an illusion of a dilating pupil by putting in little black spots around the pupil. So this is an example of a Tysical eye with a dilating pupil. And this is the confidence that we can bring back to people who have been disfigured. So that is a little bit about artificial eyes. And you can watch it as the light changes here. The bright light, you could see the small pupil there for a second. And watch as the light darkens in the video. On her right eye is the prosthesis. You can see the illusion of the pupil growing on this patient. And we believe that that's great because when she's out on a date or something like that in a restaurant environment, in a dark environment, she's not just stuck with a static pupil, which has been one of the large complaints about prosthetic eyes over the years. However, today we have begun to address them, or to address that issue and come up with some truly natural results. And I don't think anybody would know she was wearing a prosthetic eye if you were to meet her on the street. Thank you.
All right, John, thank you so much. What a fascinating presentation. I feel like I learned so much. And we are excited. We have about 10 minutes. I'm going to set the timer for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions for John, you can drop those in either the chat or the Q&A section of the chat box that's the far right corner. But either way, we'll make sure that John is able to see those. So let me check both sides of this. And Chris wanted to know, discuss further how the dilating pupil works.
Yes. So I've got some irises over here with our dilating pupils. And I've spent about 3 years just coming up with the pattern from which we make this dilating pupil. But essentially, using digital technology, I can put in some very small marks in an irregular fashion that in a normal distance nobody sees. When the light appears to darken, I don't know if we can see this here. I don't know if I can show you, but hard to hold here. But there's artificial iris. And let me see if I can hold this the right way. But as the light appears to darken, we get an illusion. Let's see if I can, how do I darken that more? That thicker area, hard to represent here, this entire area appears to grow to become the dilated pupil. And you can see the crisp pupil here. Let me see if I can maybe turn off my light here. Give me just 1 second and I'll see if I can show you. We're going to turn the light here in just a second. See if I can block the sun here with my head. but this is somewhat light dependent in the camera. Maybe adjusting my exposure. So this is hard to show on camera, but in person, we can create a really nice effect. There you go. I think you can see the large pupil right there. Versus something very small. You can only see it when the camera doesn't adjust its exposure. And that would be an example of a larger pupil. And coming up with just the small little dot pattern, we spent over 3 years developing this. And we are getting a lot of people who say it's really helping them feel more confident with their prosthetic, especially on the lighter color eyes where you really see the contrast. It makes a beautiful difference. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Awesome. Chris says, so interesting. Thank you. So awesome. That was really cool. Thank you for demonstrating that. I'm going to take Suzanne's question, and then Dina, I've got yours as well. Suzanne wanted to know, can you do this to my eye, which has been, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, exenerated? I have no object. Oh, okay, perfect. Yes. So that's
exenteration.
Yes.
Yes. This is just going to go into the artificial eye within your exenerated prosthesis. Let me see if I can find you something here real quick. So here would be an exeneration prosthesis where somebody has had a very aggressive cancer and they've lost, their entire upper or lower lids. Sometimes there are exenerations where they're able to spare the lids, which is my strong preference. The results come out far superior. But really what we're talking about is making this artificial eye inside, and in which I can insert one of my digital irises custom made for the patient. So we can mix and match all, many different colors we have. And you can really see these dilating pupils in this light right here. This one really seems to be big here, but I think if we get some nice light on here, you'll really might be able to see small pupil. But essentially, let me just show you here. I've got a wide range of colors that we've made, and all of these can be used, put in, dilating pupils and match colors. Very, very beautiful. So this is kind of my green and hazel. We've got blue colors. We've got, high structure blues. And all of these colors can be made with dilating pupils. And then finally, I've got some brown colors. And browns are kind of more simple. Many of these colors that we've made, once I've made one of these brown colors, they match so many people. So there's truly no need to hand paint, these darker colors. The lighter colors can be a little bit more, there's more variation, I think, within the lighter colors than there is within the darker colors. But all of these can be made with dilating pupils. The browns aren't quite as necessary, because typically, a dark brown color, you don't see the pupil quite as much. So I don't think that they're quite as important on the brown eyes as they are on the light blues and the light greens. Does that answer your question?
All right. Suzanne says, very cool. Thank you, John. I have a brown eye with a little hazel. Perfect. So we've got time for one more question.
And the hazels come out the best.
Oh.
Hazels come out beautiful. When they've got that little brown right around the eye, they come out just gorgeous.
Awesome. So we've got time.
And the thing is, I never thought I could make eyes that were so good. It's truly exciting, and it brings new energy into me at the office. When you make an eye and you're like, God, I never thought I could do so good. And we keep getting these time after time after time over here, and it's amazing. People are so happy.
That's so great. So John, we've got time for one more question. So I'm going to let Dina ask her question real quick. And then Anybody that has more questions for John, we are going to have a 10-minute break. So if he's able to stay around, you can talk to him at a table, or you can message him on Socio, and he will be able to take chat there as well. So Dina Scott, I was told not to take my eye out if at all possible. Could you explain why? It feels like it is scratching the inside of my eyelid. So if you want to take that one.
Yes. Not all eyes are created the same. If it is scratching you the same spot over and over, there's probably a manufacturer's defect on the artificial eye. I would go back to the ocularist who made it and see if they can fix it. And if not, find somebody better. Most eyes should be able to be worn 24/7, 365 days a year without having to be taken out. You will get less socket discharge if you can leave your eye in for 3 weeks to 5 months at a time. But if it's not made properly, you can't do it. And so, yes, you should ideally keep your prosthetic eye in maybe 3 to 5 months at a time, take it out and clean it up, because that allows the biofilm to develop on the backside of the prosthesis, the mucus, the oils, the bacteria that allows a prosthesis to function most naturally. And if you're not allowing for that buildup to take place, you end up with more dryness that causes inflammation of the tissues, that causes mucus secretion, and causes a lot of trouble. So the foundation must be done properly. And if you feel the same scratch in the same place over and over, I would take it out, feel it with your fingers, and see if there's some sort of defect. Another good trick is to use the magnifier on your cell phone and zoom in and really look at that, because that piece should be polished impeccably. And unfortunately, most of the work I see around the world isn't. So I would advise a consultation with an excellent ocularist. Perhaps there's somebody who can help you with that problem. I'm sad to hear that you're suffering from that. And I'm always happy to help you and discuss things with you if you need any help with that. I don't know if that answers your question, but most people should be able to wear their eye for months at a time. There are rare circumstances where they can't. I don't know exactly what the cause of your eye loss is, but that should be looked at. And I think you can do better.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Dina says that she'll talk to her in November, and thank you very much. We are going to move into our next break. So we've got a little video to transition, but I wanted to remind everybody that if you are ready to, if you have more questions for John, you can connect with him on Socio or try and find him in Remo when we're done, if he's able to stick around. So thank you so much, John. We will we'll connect with you shortly.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks.
How do I get mute off of there?